Yes, two young boys.
Yeah, but not gonna write anything, but I got one just in case.
Fun to see them.
You got a backup pencil
Same
too.
teachers are still.
I don't take notes.
My kids did too, but they're a little older.
Yep. Couple years older.
My grandkids,
Scary.
my grandkids, both of them, one still goes there. She's
To somewhere exotic.
Maybe. Maybe.
Okay, we'll call the meeting, the regular meeting of the White Bear Lake Conservation District Board to order October 17th, 2017. And just as a general comment, I'll remind everybody to speak clearly into the microphone so that if somebody does watch, they can pick up what we're saying. We have, oh wow, yep, we've got a good bunch. And before we get going, I'll welcome Brady Ramsey, a new member from Delwood. And Brady, would you just say a couple of things about you? And
Sure. I grew up in Matamidi on the lake and lived in Delwood now for about 4 years. And married to my wife Heather. We've got two young boys, 5 and 7, go to Matamidi. And just happy to be here and help out.
well, and welcome, and thanks for volunteering.
Thank you.
So we'll go to approval of agenda. Does anybody have any items that they would like to add or adjust on the agenda?
Mr. Chair, I would like to add to 8D1, 2 VFW applications, one for February 10th for horseshoes on the ice, and one for February 17th for softball on the ice.
Anything else? Okay, I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
second.
Okay, a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That passes. The approval, item 4, the approval of minutes for the September 19th meeting.
I move we accept the minutes.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That passes. Public comment time. If there's anybody in the public that would like to come up and talk about something that's not on the agenda, feel free to do so. We allow 15 minutes of time for this.
Thank you.
Take you about 5, huh?
Thank you. And if you can just give us your name and your address, that'd be great.
I'm Shannon Foster, and I live at 5011 Lake Avenue, which is the Shadow Gay condominiums. And I also am a resident of White Bear, but I also grew up here on the south side. Chateau Gay condominiums lake concerns. 2017 summer afternoons and into the evenings were completely ruined for Shadow Gay residents this summer. One resident has sold and another is on the verge of selling because of the abundance of noise coming from the party boats, flotilla, pontoons, power boats, jet skis, and rude occupants hanging out, drinking, and playing loud, obnoxious music. The boaters, partiers park for hours in the waters in front of West Beach and Shadow Gay condominium complex. They play very, very loud, inappropriate music, so loud that residents cannot have a conversation and enjoy their decks with grandchildren, friends, and relatives. The children and families at West Beach, the adjacent beach, are also subjected to the same inappropriate music and at times reckless watercraft. They block exits and entrances to our dock and slips, and at times are rude when asked to move. Because of the congregation of swimmers, dogs, boats, water toys, safety and health issues are a concern. Boating accidents, fire hazard, and water quality. Chateau residents have frequently called the White Bear Lake Water Patrol to complain. The music is turned down when the call is made, and after the Water Patrol leaves, the music and chaos continues. This is my personal feeling, is that they have a scanner, because they can tell.
Okay, thank you, Shannon. And we don't have this particular item in front of us, but I appreciate you bringing your concerns to the
Thank you
board.
for-
Does anybody have any questions for
Does
Shannon?
anyone have any questions?
Mike?
She's not exaggerating at all.
Thank you.
Yeah, we hear them over on the Matamidi side as well. I have to accept it as ambient lake noise, but it's
Yeah.
people need to be good neighbors.
And again, it's not all of those people, it's a few.
Right, right. And they're not necessarily White Bear people. They're people that put in at Ramsey. I see them come over, just put in and come around. Anything else? Thank you.
Okay, thank you,
Oh,
Shannon.
Did you have a question? No. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
thank you. And others? Fletcher, would you like to speak about your item now?
Thank you. I'm Fletcher Driscoll. I live at 28 Peninsula Road in White Bear, in Delwood. And I'd like to introduce also Jay Rendell, will kind of pitch hit for me. Jay is the ex-invasive species representative for the DNR. He's now retired, but he has a lot of experience in milfoil. So that's why I've asked him to come tonight. I'm here, first of all, thank you for doing what you're doing. I know it takes a lot of time, a lot of energy and everything, and I'm very happy that you're doing it. Thank you. And I was a member of the Lake Management Formation Committee in the late 1990s, and one of the primary things we wanted to do was preserve the recreational quality of the lake. That was one of our main objectives. And frankly, we're losing the battle to milfoil. And I'm speaking now primarily from a sailor's point of view, but we water ski and we use power boats, and we have a situation where we're not gaining on this problem. In fact, we're losing. So we lose so much of the lake that is pretty depressing. And tonight, what Jay and I would like to do is to propose a different regime in terms of your treatment process, both the process itself and the scope of the process. And Jay will describe this in a little bit more detail, but we feel that perhaps your monetary expenditures are not too far off from being right, but they have to be more effective in terms of the treatment selection and the application. And one of the primary points that we would like to make as a duo here is that early treatment is certainly is necessary. I've talked to Mike about the fact that there's always a big gap of time between the time that you do the surveys and then the implementation of the treatment itself. And if that's a month, that's too late because it's already impinging on the sailboats that we race. And each of our A boats travels about 22 to 25 miles, each boat on the lake, every race. And so we have a tendency to find all the milfoil everywhere. And unfortunately, much of the lake now is off limits, not only for the A scows, but even for the small boats belonging to the high school sailors or other sailing groups. And Jay, would you step up here now and take over?
Hello, I'm Jay Rendell. I live at 4740 Stewart Avenue in White Bear Lake. And as Fletcher said, I was the DNR Invasive Species Coordinator for over 20 years. And I've sailed on the lake for over 40 years, or actually exactly 40 years. And I'm on the board of the White Bear Sailing School and the White Bear Yacht Club Sailing Division. So I'm very involved with all of this stuff, and I sail my boat out to the races every Wednesday night and Saturday, and I try to get through the milfoil, and so it affects me directly. And the points that we wanted to make today are, one, that there are large areas of milfoil that are below the surface, but they still greatly affect the sailboats, because the sailboats have either, like the Black Bear Yacht Club, keels that go down several feet in the water, or the scows that we race have, Fletcher's A scows have bilge boards that go down 6 feet into the water, and my smaller scow, they probably go down 3.5 feet or so. So if the milfoil is down there, even 2 feet below the surface, it's causing problems, and we can't sail through it. We can't, it stops us. And so we have to avoid large areas of the lake, and coming out of the Boatworks Bay to go out to the race course, I have to sail out to the middle of the bay and then sail out there, because I can't go along the north side of the bay there, up to where the island is and past the island. And there's a lot of other places that I'm not going to get into. I just wanted to give you that example. So the point for defining the problem is, it's not just a problem when it gets to the surface or a couple feet below the surface. It's a problem when starts to be a problem when it's 6 feet below the surface. And as Fletcher was talking about the timelines for treating, that makes a difference, because if it starts getting up above those areas, that's a problem. And it affects the Black Bear Yacht Club, the White Bear Yacht Club sailors, the sailing school that sails out of where the yacht club is. They have regattas, and they have classes there, and there's lots of milfoil up in that north side of the North Bay as well. And high school sailing regattas, they have to move those out away from where it's convenient to run them right next to the dock. They're changing kids back and forth between races, and if they have to go out further, that becomes a problem as well. And it's especially important. White Bear's had sailboats racing here since the late 1800s. So this is nothing new. We've been here way before milfoil and way before most of the people were here. There were people sailing competitively on the lake. And there's a large volume of sailing. Almost every day there's sailboats out there racing between the different yacht clubs. So it's very important that we maintain those opportunities. And if you take away a third of the lake, it makes sailing not as much fun and not as fair, because you're all confined in a smaller area. So some thoughts on treatment, things to think about. There's one thing that I don't know if anyone's mentioned it, but now that we have zebra mussels in the lake, people may have noticed that the water clarity, at least at certain times of the year, is even better than it used to be, which means that milfoil could grow deeper in the water and in new areas where it may not have been a problem before. Now, our quality was good, so I don't know that this is going to be a major issue, but it's something that could affect it. Treating earlier and broader would be beneficial. There's, the important thing with the treatments is to have contact of the herbicide on the plants as long as possible. And if we treat an area and the water moves, the herbicide moves, and it may not be effective in that area. So if we treated a broader area, we could perhaps reduce that problem. The surveying, I think, should be done earlier. The DNR will issue a permit if they know there's milfoil present. Doesn't have to be up to a certain point, which I think is a misconception amongst many people, that it has to come to the surface or it has to be a foot or two below the surface. That's not true. I talked to Keegan Lund, who's the aquatic invasive species specialist for this area, and he's the one that would issue the permits. And so he wouldn't have any problem with these points of doing things earlier, doing them broader, and I forget the other point I was saying, but so I think we should be more less conservative and more aggressive in trying to treat it, so that we can perhaps even reduce it in future years by treating more now. If we keep doing small areas, it can continue to spread back to other areas or from one to another. He also told me that White Bear Lake treats later in the year than most other lakes. Most of them treat much earlier than we do here. Okay, so as I said, we don't need to wait to get a permit or to treat until it's up to a certain point. We can do that early, and that's what we would like to suggest to the district, that's the approach we take, to improve the recreational use of the lake and to minimize the overall amount of milfoil that's present.
You're the pro, I wanted to ask you a question. What would be a good trigger point for us to set as a deadline? Would it be water temperature? Would it be, what should we use as a guideline?
Well, first, I want to make it clear, I am not a milfoil expert. We had a milfoil expert, Chip Welling, and he unfortunately passed away from cancer this past year. But in talking to Keegan, he said if it's actively growing, that's a time that we should start to look at it and to treat it. That we don't need to wait till it's, already 6 feet high or 10 feet high or whatever, depending on the depth. So I think we can defer that to some others that are more of a milfoil expert. But
Jay and Fletcher, thanks a lot for coming forward with your comments. And just so the board knows, considering that Steve McComas is going to be talking on this issue, I asked Fletcher and Jay to just get their points out before Steve so that we can use those as, so Steve can help us respond to those. So thank you, Jay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Fletcher. And anyone else with public comment time? Okay, that takes us to new business. And Eurasian milfoil, that's a very nice segue, thank you, to Steve McComas. And Mike, do you want to give a little introduction here?
Well, we've seen Steve a few times for the new board members. Steve is the lake doctor. He's who we hire as our consultant, doing a survey for Eurasian water milfoil and giving us a wrap-up of effectiveness of the treatment, weed inventories, all sorts of things that we look at. And he's here tonight to explain it all and to answer questions, and we'll certainly talk about what has been brought up. Thank you. In the treatment qualifications, how we can improve on it. So, Steve McComas, it's all yours.
Hey, thank you very much. Well, I gotta admit, I'm kind of a short timer here. I've only worked on the lake for 20 years. So Jay has been, and Fletcher have been here longer, and so has Mike and maybe others too, but we're so trying, and I appreciate that input, and that's what we'll talk about as well. I have some thoughts on that also. So I might use the overhead here a little bit, but, so others can see it, but these are kind of little pictures, but I do have some bigger maps on the back side. So, to start out with, see. Let me just turn this on, what do you think? Not sure how that works, but at any rate, so the idea is that we do what's called a meander survey. We go all the way around the lake, and typically we'll have some help. And Mike Bronto's been helping for the last few years, and Mike does know the lake fairly well, very well. So that's a big help. So we go around.
Can I have you use the microphone?
Can I use the microphone over here?
Yep, that's perfectly fine.
Okay, good, thanks.
Could you, Lisa,
Oh, Lisa.
Yes, ma'am.
do you turn this on underneath?
Nope, I'll get you on there.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Well, so it's a meander survey, and we've been doing this in June. In this case, typically late June, the idea that we treat it in early July, and that should give us all of July and then all of August. Jay has a good point. Some folks in some lakes have started to treat earlier in the year, and that's relatively new. For the most part, our surveys in June, mid-June to end of June, has been pretty standard, but some groups have started earlier. And it's kind of an experiment because they started doing this in Wisconsin. It's perfectly fine. However, here's one little thing to also consider is that as we get more information and we get more performance data, so to speak, if we treat too early, milfoil will resprout and grow back in that same year. And then by mid to end of August, there is another crop of milfoil, so to speak, coming up. So it's a little bit of a timing issue that we want to treat early, but not too early, and we don't want to treat too late. So I agree that we could look at this milfoil community a little bit earlier in the summer, a little bit earlier in June, and that might help as well. At any rate, here's what we found though on June 30th. It's that first map up here. Get that. That's what I brought some handouts, so.
Well, Lisa will fix it, I think.
Okay. At any rate, let's look on the other side. On the back side, these maps are a little bit bigger, and that might be helpful. So what we do is we go around and we put a rake down on a telescoping pole, and we grab a sample. We look at native plants and we look at the Eurasian milfoil. And what we've been doing, if it is more than a few stems on a rake head, we'll give it a density rating. It's either going to be light, which is green, yellow, which is moderate, or red, which is heavy. And typically, what we're kind of counting as heavy is when it's within a couple feet of the surface in the end of June. Moderate is only maybe a couple feet or 2, 3, 4 feet below the surface. And light growth is when it's probably only a foot or so tall and sparse. So that's kind of our rating system. So we get back, we put all those density sightings and observations onto this map, and that's what we have for June 30th. Then we circle around the patches of milfoil, and when we circle around there, it's called the delineation. We can get an acres to treat. And so that's been kind of the standard technique. White Bear, we use that here, and so do others. That has been a pretty standard procedure. And this year we delineated and treated 65 acres. So we did that, well, we made the delineation in June. The application was later, and then we came back out at the end of August to assess, to see what is the status of milfoil after treatment. And that's what that bottom map shows down here. Now we have black dots on the map. That means that milfoil was not observed at that specific point. Now, we don't, we try to survey and make observations as we go. If we see a visual milfoil, we'll note it. Otherwise, we're using the rake to sample the milfoil. And what we found is that the treatment was probably the effects for milfoil control, not excellent, but probably more along the lines of fair to good. And that some areas, we really knocked down the milfoil. Down in the southern end, in that southwestern area, a lot of black dots. We did not observe any milfoil within that treatment area. However, in the western basin there and around that point, Manitou Island Point, there was some milfoil present. So we had delineated that the treatment looks like it was not 100% effective. So when you see some yellows and some greens, that's milfoil that's there at light to moderate growth. We didn't see at this point. There's other milfoil in the lake, but on the gauge that we've been using, and we can adjust this in the future, but on the gauge we've been using for density, we did not have any reds. That doesn't mean that there weren't some reds out there, reds being the heavy growth matting at the surface, so to speak, at the end of August. But in summary, we had 65 acres to treat. The treatment was mostly fair to good, but not excellent. But the end result of the areas that were treated were satisfactory. Now, what's happening out there? If we look back on this other page, down there, this graph, we have a graph of herbicide treatments over the years, going back to 1988, really the first year it came in. And you can see that there was a couple of years there, not much treatment. We boosted it up to about 100 acres in 1992, and then milfoil was down for a while, and for a period in there was very little treatment. In fact, a lot of those acres that were treated were done by lake residents, and we went and got the records and put that on. the watershed, the conservation district was not really having to treat open water at this point. However, when lake levels started to go down, milfoil responded, because with shallower water, the light can penetrate all the way to the sediments and really stimulate Eurasian milfoil growth, along with other plants as well. But milfoil is certainly will respond to that increased sunlight, and also it was growing in new areas where it hadn't grown previously, because now low lake levels, getting sunlight down there. There was nitrogen in the sediments that hadn't really been tapped, hadn't really been used, because there hadn't been plant growth there in the past. So all of a sudden now there's sunlight, and milfoil has a lot of nitrogen in the sediments to work with. And you can see that in 2010, we treated over 160 acres. It really had responded to those low lake levels and new areas. And the next year, didn't have to treat as much, but it did come back. You can kind of see it's been up and down since 2010. And in the last 2 years here, we've treated over 60 acres, but not much more than, but less than 70 acres. Now what's happening is that as the lake levels come back up, now sunlight is going to be more filtered, is not going to reach quite as far maybe as it used to, because we have higher lake levels. However, we have clearer water because of the zebra mussels. So the high lake levels are somewhat offset by the clearer water. And that's why we're still getting, even now the lake levels are coming back up. In the past, when we had lake levels about this, at this range, we had less milfoil. But if you look at the transparency, and that's the Secchi disc transparency on that bottom left graph, we don't have to look at the numbers so much, but you can see the ups and downs in transparency. In this case, that transparency is a summer average in meters. So the best transparency was when the lake was at some of its lower levels, because of light coming down and abundant plant growth, and the plants actually cleared up the water and really kind of helped themselves, because now you had a better light field, and so it was kind of feeding on itself. Clearer water, more plant growth, more plants, it would help sustain that clear water. But then as lake levels started coming up, the transparency was still kind of holding its own, but the treatments were still in the range of less than 100 acres over the last few years. The last 2 years, again, what's happened with clearing the water with zebra mussels, but increasing the lake levels, they've canceled each other out. We still have relatively abundant milfoil, but at the 60-acre range that we've been treating. So that's kind of the summary in a nutshell. We've been treating milfoil up to this point pretty much for recreational use, but more for motor use. If we could maintain the milfoil below 2 feet of the water surface, that usually would clear the way for props. However, what we're finding out, the sailing tradition in White Bear is exceptional. There might not be another lake in the state with this type of tradition. And for sailing then, maybe we want to reconsider the level that milfoil is treated to. And that would mean treating more acres and earlier in the year to accommodate some of the sailing concerns. So it's certainly it's kind of a judgment call, and that's up to the board. We can delineate using the same methods, maybe a little bit earlier, and delineate the areas to treat, and then bring that back to the board as well. So that could be a little bit different twist in the future, that is to manage milfoil rather than for motorboat use, manage it more for sailboats and the 5 to 6 foot depth that we need to be weed free. However, there's one other point to consider, and that is with the clearer water, we're going to get native plants growing as well. So in some areas, even if we treat milfoil, this herbicide is somewhat selective for Eurasian milfoil and not for the native plants. We can knock the milfoil down to native plants, will still be standing up. Sometimes native plants can be close, within 6 feet of the surface as well. So that's just another consideration. However, some of these beds are predominantly milfoil. And so we've been kind of tracking that as well. I don't have the final report yet, but every site that we go to, we're marking Eurasian milfoil and native plants and with densities. So when we get that, that'll be, sorry, I don't have that done tonight, but that'll be ready for the next meeting for sure in November. So that's kind of a overview of our aquatic plant program or Eurasian milfoil program. Some information on the history of herbicide use, water clarity dynamics, and then even how that all feeds in with the lake levels as well. So with that, questions?
When you go to a deeper depth to treat it, is your treatment as effective as, if you get down 6 feet, is that gonna be as effective as when you're treating it at 2 feet?
If the plant is actively growing, it can be effective. But when you're treating down to 6 feet, you're gonna probably need, well, depending on the depth, the applicator wants 2 parts, 3 parts, or 4 parts per million. So if we're treating in those areas, depth-wise, he's going to put that into his equations. It might be a little bit more expensive to treat some of those stands out there in a little bit deeper water as well.
Is there anything that the gentleman mentioned that when you apply this herbicide and it moves in the water because it's a liquid, is there anything that's a solid that would go to the bottom of the lake that would be getting the actual root?
You know, there is a herbicide that's granular. It's called triclopyr, and that is about 2 to 3 times more expensive, though, than the liquid. What they've been doing sometimes is that the applicator will make a pass over a treatment area, and then come back about 7 to 8 hours later and make a pass right adjacent to that where he hadn't treated earlier to get us a little bit more contact time, because as it was mentioned by Jay, is that contact time and concentration are the critical factors for milfoil control. That is, you want maximize your contact time, the amount of time that herbicide is going to be on the plant, and also want to maximize the concentration, keep the concentration up. So sometimes if when the plants are down and they're only a couple feet high, you want a calmer day, that's for sure, because otherwise you have a higher tendency, higher probability of some of that herbicide drifting off. So you would over-treat an area to make sure that your contact time and your concentration were high enough to get good control.
Is there better results with the granule herbicide?
It's mixed. And sometimes you do get better results, but if the liquid herbicide, 2,4-D, is applied, and properly, you should get good control with 2,4-D.
Okay.
Using the right concentration.
I'm under the impression that you go out and survey the lake, and then the DNR's gotta come out. I know how quickly they come out, and approve what you surveyed. And I guess that's a 2-part question. Are they efficient? Do they come out and take care of it quickly, or do the usual DNR takes forever a day?
It kind of depends on their workload too, George. Sometimes they can be out there the next day. Sometimes it takes a week or so, and then the permit is processed
And
after
then
that.
the other question I have is, do they usually approve everything you lay out?
Usually they do.
They do, they're not picky.
They're not cutting back too much. I've done this long enough, and they have good confidence that we can delineate milfoil beds that we're not really treating areas where there's no milfoil, for example. That's one of the advantages of an independent party doing the delineation, where sometimes the herbicide guys will say, well, yeah, I can delineate that. But sometimes you might be spending more money than you need to.
Mark?
Oh, thank you. Steve, when you do put the liquid down, does it just have to hit a part of the plant to kill the whole plant, or does it need to be immersed all the way down?
No, this is a systemic herbicide, so if it can hit the plant takes up the herbicide and translocates it to the roots, and then it kills it from the roots on up. And what it is what they call a growth hormone mimic, an auxin mimic. There's growth hormones that's what this herbicide represents. And what happens is that when this plant takes up this herbicide, 2,4-D or triclopyr, which is the other systemic herbicide they've been using, it's the same basic idea, is that the plant grows so fast it kills itself. It's a growth hormone that mimics natural hormone, and it's very selective for Eurasian milfoil. So all you need to do is get some of it onto the plant, it translocates it down, but you need to get enough to hit the plant so that you'll get that effect.
Thank you.
Mike?
Steve, also, the plant has to be growing when it's, when
Yes.
this contact herbicide hits it. It can't be dormant. It has to be actually growing to take it in.
That's
So the
right.
conditions have to be right for it to be growing.
That's right. And so it has to be actively growing, and that's also, you don't want to wait too long, because what happens, sometimes milfoil, like this time of the year right now, would not be a very good treatment approach, because it puts out this other attached algae, and it gets kind of encrusted with a whole variety of microbial things, and those actually will keep the herbicide from making contact with the plant itself. So when it's actively growing and you get that bright green, those bright green leaflets, that's the best time to treat. And actually, when we've been treating in early July, that should be just fine. And of course, the plant is growing before that as well, so it can be treated earlier.
We treated on July 14th this year.
Okay.
The sailing season runs from Memorial Day to Labor Day, pretty much, right? We need to reassess our timeframes, if we could do it earlier.
And Steve, I'm going to ask a question, but before you answer it, I'm going to ask a second. I want to know if you have an opinion at the moment on whether we should treat twice a year, as an example, an earlier treatment and a later treatment. But if we do treat either with a heavier dosage, say 8 parts, I don't know, instead of 4, or more than once, do we risk negatively impacting the water quality or anything else? And can you just talk about that for a moment?
Yeah, you can have that potential if you get such a widespread kill that the plants die back in mass, and then they go down to the bottom. If they're all decomposing in the middle of the summer, like would happen, is that you lose oxygen in the bottom water. Phosphorus comes up out of the sediments right in the heat of the summer, and then could go into algae blooms, and you can get algae blooms from that type of an effect. However, if we only treat, and the DNR does limit us to 15% of the littoral zone, that's one of the reasons why they limit the amount of herbicide that you can use, so that you don't treat such widespread areas that you'd get this massive dieback at the same time, and then the potential algae blooms. Now, when we talk about earlier, when we're talking about 2 treatments, that kind of mean 1 treatment at 8 o'clock in the morning and coming back in the afternoon, about 6-7 hours later, to treat that same area, to give it a double dose right on the same day. You can treat early in the year and then come back and treat later. That's going to cost twice as much money. And also, you're going to be somewhat restricted on areas that you can treat the second time. I mean, 15% is for the whole lake. You might not be able to treat those same areas twice if we're approaching that 15% limit.
How close are we right now to that 15% limit, do you know?
We can go up to about 100. I think a couple years ago we maxed out about 160 acres.
Okay.
Would be about that 15%. Now, as lake level is coming up, we got a little bit more surface area. We probably have a few more acres.
And then what is the earliest you would think that it could be treated in the year? So May, June, middle May?
There's advantages and disadvantages to when we treat. So, for example, milfoil does not grow up to within 5-6 feet of the surface all around the lake. It will do that in some patches, and we're pretty sure that by June 30th, we're able to spot most of the potentially heavy growth, and that's what we're treating. If we go out earlier, some folks are out in late May, early June, but milfoil is only probably about 1 foot or 2 tall, and you could treat that, but it might be that by mid-July, end of July, that milfoil might never have gotten much past 1 foot or 2 foot tall. So you might be over-treating to a degree by by trying to estimate where the milfoil is going to be heavy, or treating all the milfoil. Because what would happen is if you delineate early, you might want to consider treating almost all the milfoil you see, because you're not sure. I mean, that would be the reason for doing it early.
And then, I'm sorry to keep asking questions, but do we ever do overlays where we go, say 2010, 2011, 2013, 14, 15, and put an overlay down and say, this area every year we have to treat? So we just know we're going to have to treat that area.
Yes, but you know what? That's only about, of the 60, 70, 80 acres that we might treat, that overlay pattern of perennial heavy growth might only be 10 or 15 acres.
Okay.
And the otherwise, we have patches that come up and we're treating 1 year, and we may not treat that patch again for a couple years, but it's grown up heavy in another area. So there are some areas of perennial, of annual heavy growth, and we kind of know where those are, but we're looking for those other sporadic patches that are coming up, treating those.
Oh, Mike.
Could you venture to guess which would be better, to have 2 treatments or 1 treatment of a higher concentration?
You mean 2 treatments, different dates?
Yeah,
early?
well, you mentioned like one at 8 o'clock in the morning,
Oh,
and one
okay,
later
yeah.
in the day, or have a higher concentration and have just 1 treatment, because 2 treatments would cost more. The depth that you treat at, we treat, down to 6 feet, that's one price, but if you go deeper than that,
Yeah.
And then if your concentration is higher than what you normally have, or what we've done in the past, that affects the price too.
That's right.
So, but a higher concentration, 1 treatment would probably be less expensive than 2 treatments.
Yes. Oh, so for example, one possibility though would be to use a higher concentration, but then treat only half the patch and early in the morning, knowing that the herbicide is going to drift a little bit, and then come back later and treat at that high concentration again in the area right next to it, knowing that it's going to drift again, but you get additional contact time. And that's a relatively new technique that they're just starting to use. So that we've seen some good results from that approach. The other approach, like Mike mentioned, is just treat it at full strength 1 time and hit the entire area. And that is also, should be effective. Under most cases, it is effective.
So you're saying they're both effective,
They're
equally
both effective. And I kind of like that what they call the dual pass. It's a relatively new technique that just started, that they were just using the last couple of years. That avoids, I don't think we need the granular then, because that is so expensive, but we can get good contact time and good concentration with this dual pass approach. You treat lanes in a treatment area at high concentration. You wait a couple hours, because really the herbicide only lasts, its effectiveness only lasts at those concentrations probably only for a few hours. So, but you come back then and hit it again just kind of make sure. And that has been effective on Big Marine and Forest Lake. They've done that. They've done that in Schmidt Lake and a few other lakes that I'm aware of. So it's a relatively new approach, or a newer approach. So it's something that, and it shouldn't cost that much more. There is some time involved, but basically the same amount of herbicide.
Would it make sense to treat that area that has been historically a large growth of milfoil, the 15 or 20% that you mentioned, early on in the season, and then do go through the lake again early
Okay.
July, late June,
That'd
and
be a
check
nice-
it and see if you've got any more large growth spots?
That'd be an approach. Yeah, you could do that. We have, like you mentioned, we put the overlays down for a number of years. We're gonna have some areas that are gonna show up that we've been treating every year for probably 10 years in a row. Treat those areas early, and then come back in mid-June or so, or a couple weeks later, and see what else is coming up next. And you should be able to do that. A little bit more cost just because of the time involved for the applicator, but not necessarily more herbicide. And actually, you might be able to save money, because then you would be more apt to treat the areas that are going to produce that potential nuisance or heavier growth.
Okay.
And I guess one thing that we could do is get input from the sailing clubs on areas that we see as the problem areas, perennially problem areas.
That's right.
And if there's an area that the sailors know, oh, well, at this area as well, then we could take that into consideration also.
Yeah.
Okay, Diane?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have just a lake question. I've noticed since the water's come up, especially on the south side of the lake, going out, say, maybe 60 to 80 feet, where it used to be sand, it's now black muck and this green gelatinous oozy hanging in the water.
Yeah.
Algae?
Yes, yes.
And I was just wondering, is that going to go away, or is it here to stay?
No, that should go away. That should be temporary. We're going to see a few changes in the lake over the next couple of years with lake levels coming back up. That benthic algae, that's what we call, bottom algae or benthic algae, that dark green, almost black, and sometimes it's going to even lift off the bottom, and it is doesn't look good at all. The good news is that it's not a toxic algae, but it can stain a boat, it can stain things, so it's unpleasant, but it should be temporary, and it should not be a long-lasting problem.
Temporary,
Year or two,
okay.
another couple growing seasons, and then it'll be back to its old
Sandy beach?
it should be, unless the hydrology or the current as they move around the lake should have changed. And once the currents get reestablished again, a lot of that stuff will actually be kind of washed away. Water moves in this lake about a centimeter a second. It's always moving. And sometimes you have water moving on top of water, but there are currents that are constantly moving in the lake. And so you can have something in the south end of the lake, and in a day, if it was just riding the currents, it could be at the other end of the lake in 24 hours, even with no wind. Just light, the heat and which would generate some wave action, horizontal movements.
Thank you.
Mike?
Steve, early on this summer, we had an algae bloom. It was like a green cotton that was on top of plants, and we had a resident write us a letter about it. Could you explain what that is? Is it detrimental? It goes away, I know.
Yeah, it does. That happens when, again, with lake changes. That's also a benthic algae. It starts growing on the bottom. It gets sunlight, and in clear water, it fills up with gas vacuoles, and it'll actually float up to the top because it wants to maximize light. It's down on the bottom picking up nutrients. It floats up to the surface then and gets maximum light and gets 2 or 3 more generations going. And once it runs out of phosphorus, it'll settle back down again. It puts out resting cells and settles back down to the bottom. And that season or that crop, it can last 30, 40 days. So if it starts in May or June, it could persist through July and even into early August. And some lakes, boy, I've seen it pop up in May. Other lakes, it's coming up more in early June. But that's a filamentous algae.
That can happen every year, or?
It shouldn't happen every year. It depends on snow cover, water clarity, water levels, and things like that. It could happen next year in some other parts of the lake, but it doesn't happen. It's not usually, again, a perennial problem.
Yeah, it seemed to go away, but you can still see some areas, if you look down, where there's kind of a brownish ball of cotton
Yep.
laying down there.
And some of it's sometimes it's cottony, and sometimes it's real slimy. You put your hand through it, it just goes right through your fingers. It's all green algae, and different species have different types of, I guess, slime factors. Some of it's kind of cottony, others it has a lot more polysaccharides, and it's a lot slimier.
But it's a natural occurrence. It's not a detriment to the lake.
And it doesn't mean that there's pollution or anything else. It's a naturally occurring type of filamentous algae growth. It can occur anywhere, including the boundary waters.
Steve, can you talk for just a moment about other invasive species that we ought to be on the watch for, anything that we should be considering as a board for future? I know that's a real broad question, right? But you have some pretty broad experience, so what do you think about that?
There are some species out there. Some are way out there. Some are closer. There's this thing called rusty crayfish, it's not moving around very fast. It's in Leech Lake and a few other lakes. We don't want that in White Bear, but it is not colonizing many new lakes in a year, so that's kind of on the watch. But the one that's probably most prominent in the news right now is this thing called starry stonewort. And that is a macroalgae, it's called, which is a fancy word for a big algae that's all strung together. And a good example of a macroalgae is this thing called chara that we have in the lake, or they also call it muskgrass. And chara is the same thing. In fact, it's closely related to starry stonewort. Starry stonewort is an invasive species, and it's up in Lake Coronis right now. It covers about 200 acres. And I've been working with a group up there. They are trying to find the best ways to control starry stonewort, because here's what can happen in some cases. Under good growing conditions, in 4 feet of water, we can have these mats that are 3 feet thick. And so you have 1 foot of open water, and that's not good for fish, it's not good for swimming, and that can be a potential problem. However, in other lakes, where it's just been found, a new infestation, and almost always they've been showing up at the boat landings, Lake Sylvia in Wright County, and also Rice Lake, which is over in Stearns County. I've been working with those groups. So far, they are contained in the public access. So as a board, if starry stonewort was to be first identified, and usually it's going to be identified at the public access, I would try to be very aggressive. Copper sulfate's what they've been using, because that's an algicide, and this is an algae. And I would treat it probably 2 or 3 times in a year, in a summer growing season. But theoretically, if you get it early, you only need probably treat less than 1 acre. But I think the idea would be to try to contain it in public access so it doesn't get out and spread around further into the lake, because then it has potential to be a problem. We're not sure what all the drivers are for this macroalgae yet. I mean, in some lakes, like in Coronis even, it's light growth in some areas and heavier growth in other areas. We don't know what drives that. We have better ideas of milfoil and curlyleaf pondweed, but this is so new that we're we're learning as we go. So that's probably the main new species to keep an eye open for.
And so if I understand correctly, the best defense at the moment is to continue boat inspections and education of the public, to try to keep people from, encourage people to do the right thing and not transfer water from one lake to the other.
That's right. And even Ramsey County is sponsoring some surveys at boat accesses, which have been primarily for zebra mussels. But the group that's doing that is also on the lookout for starry stonewort, since that's where we found it. It's only in 11 or 12 lakes in the state, but it's been showing up at the public accesses. So a public access quick survey, some rakes and even some snorkeling is a handy way to spot a relatively new infestation. So far, it's not in the metro area, but it's right on the borders, Wright County, Stearns County. That's probably the biggest new species out there right now that we're on the watch for.
Okay, any other questions for Steve? All right, thanks, Steve.
You're welcome.
And thanks to you, Mike, and for the work you guys do.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay, we're on to item 7, unfinished business. There's nothing, no unfinished business. Reports, action items, item 8A, the executive committee. I'll start just by mentioning that the executive committee tried to meet with the city of Delwood. They were unavailable, but I did speak with the mayor of Delwood, Mayor Nuffert, sorry. And he thought the board was doing a good job. He's interested in how this lawsuit settlement will, or the findings will impact the work that we do, but he didn't have anything else to add beyond that. And then 8A1, the administrative secretary or assistant status. It looks like, and Mary, I'm trying to read this, it looks like we have 3 applications so far, and we may get more. At past meetings, I've asked if anyone was interested in assisting with that process, which would involve reviewing the resumes, interviewing, and then bringing forth a recommendation to the board. No volunteers, and so it's been the executive committee's role to do that. But I'll ask one more time, is there anyone that's interested in participating in that process with us, with the executive committee? Okay, so we'll move forward. We'll review the resumes that we get. We will reach out to a few candidates and ask, set up interviews. And if all goes well, we're going to try to have a recommendation for the board at the November meeting. That seems a little optimistic sitting here today, but we'll do what we can to make that happen. Any questions on that? Scott?
Where did we finally decide to, say, advertise and post this?
Press publications, the League of Minnesota Cities website, our website.
Yeah, it's on our website. And just wondering, if you only got 3, there's not a whole lot.
Right. And Mary, did we advertise anywhere else?
No.
Okay.
That was it. And the application form was a little slow in getting on the website. So as they came in, I sent them an application form, which is the reason that I extended our deliberations, or your deliberations, to the 27th, because those application forms will take a little bit to filter back here. But it is on the website now.
Okay, so again, we have 3 and we're expecting more, so hopefully we'll get a good.
Okay, yeah, I would just, be concerned if, whether where we did put those, they wound up getting into the job aggregators, like Indeed.com or Monster. And I suppose you could go out and look there and see if they've picked it up, because they're always trolling for stuff like that, and they pull them into their aggregation site. But that's where most people look for jobs,
Okay,
so.
I'd also
Great.
suggest trying Craigslist. That's where I've got 8 employees for my business, and that's whenever we need somebody, that's where we go. It's free, and lots of people use it.
okay, so we'll take a look at that. Any other questions, comments?
Have we tried the White Bear Press?
Yeah, it's in all the
Oh,
press
sorry.
publications.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay, then we'll move on to, 8B, the Lake Level Resolution Committee is inactive at the moment. So 8C, Lake Quality Committee, Mike?
Lake quality, water level today is 923.09. 923.09. That's 6 inches higher than last year at this same time. And it seems to be holding its own quite well. Of course, we've had a lot of rain, and that's really good. The water temperature is 54 degrees. Last year at this time, it was 55 degrees, so that's in order. Cooling down. And 8C3, the last thing, 2 budgeted items, that the buoys are on the treasurer's report tonight to pay, and then John Redpath has taken out the buoys for me. I've done it about 10 years, and now he's taken over and is gonna take out the shallow and put in the shallow water buoys, and then that'll be on next month's treasurer's report. Any questions?
Okay, thank you, Mike. 8D, the Lake Utilization Committee, Mark?
I'll just go down it as the agenda has it. Permits, permit applications. The first one is the Rotary Club, and that's for the Barely Open, the annual golf event. Same as last year. And let's see, that's going to be on Saturday, February 3rd, Ramsey Beach area. My committee moved to approve, and I so move.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on that item? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That passes.
The next one is the Special Olympics. That's the Polar Plunge. And again, same as last year, same area, same location, same folks running it. I think, and as it is for the Special Olympics, I'd like to move, we waive the fee, and Utilization Committee move to approve, and I do too.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion in several seconds. And any discussion? And I'll ask a question. So I noticed 3,000 people is what they're anticipating. Is that pretty typical? Is that growing, or?
Yes, and they do have areas such as Eagle Brook where they have buses that people park, and they run buses back and forth all day. They've done a really good job. It's run by the sheriff's department, so it's usually pretty well kept.
Nice. Okay, any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That passes.
The next two added to the agenda today, they are both by the VFW. The first one is the,
And Mark, we should just note that I don't think any of us have those in our packets.
no, I believe they just came in Monday, but, or when did these come in, Mary?
They went out on Friday.
No, but the VFW
Oh,
application.
yes. Either Friday or Monday, I'm not sure, because I just, I work on Thursday and
Right.
Tuesday. So it came in during that period of time.
And the VFW is here tonight, and so I'd be happy to table it if you want to. Otherwise, it's basically the same two events as they had last year. Well, they tried to have last year, but it's right in front of the VFW. And, the first one is the horseshoes. We told them that we would ask you to waive the fee because of last year, because of conditions, they were unable to have it, but they did pay the fee. So I guess my question to the board then is, do we want to hold this so you can see the applications, or do we want to just decide on it this evening? Is there
But
consensus?
they're identical to last year?
Yes, they are. And the horseshoes would be February 10th. It's a Saturday.
They've done this for years, and they're very reputable with how they handle it, and I see no problem with having to study over the application. If you guys have already seen it and approved it, and it's the same as last year.
Would you like to make a motion, Mark?
I'd like to make a motion that we do add these officially to the agenda and vote on them tonight, and we approve them.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second to approve these two applications. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Those two pass.
Mr. Chair and Board, next we move into 8D2 licenses. The first one is the White Bear Yacht Club. They are identical. This one is renewal, no identical to last year. And the only thing that we do not have is current insurance. So the Utilization Committee would like to make a movement to approve this as far as, and with a caveat that they do give us their updated insurance before they put the dock in.
We've received that now.
Perfect.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
I move to approve.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second without the stipulation of the insurance because that's already been provided. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Mr. Chair and Board, the next one on the agenda is Snyder's Bay. That's on the South Shore. Again, that is renewal identical to last year. We had no complaints on this dock, no issues. They did show up. They said that they had no problems last year. Utilization Committee would like to move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Discussion point, I need my vote recorded as abstain because this is my association.
I'm
So
sorry.
I'm going to abstain on this, so record it that way.
Any further? All those in favor say aye.
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 As same sign, opposed, same sign. So that passes with one abstention.
Mr. Chair and Board, the last license application is Alicia Heights. That's in Matamidi. Again, it is a renewal identical to last year, and the Utilization Committee moves to approve.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. And that passes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we're moving on to the next item, 8E, the Lake Education Committee. Scott?
Yeah, everything's going well on the website. There's some new content on the website, so I encourage everyone to look at that. We do have the job posting is up there, and we have some educational material that links back to the Minnesota EPA on keeping leaves out of the storm sewers and such, and a few other cleanup items. I'm looking forward to when we have some new staff. There's a bunch of other cleanup that has to be done. That's it.
Okay,
Quick question for Scott. Last year, we put something in the White Bear Press regarding the zebra mussels. Are we going to do that again this year?
We haven't considered that. We did I did contact the DNR to see if they're interested in another year of monitoring zebra mussels. And they're going to do it at least one more year. So the information on the website requesting people to participate is still there. We did not consider another ad this year. I guess I didn't think of that. It might be too late at this point because I think a lot of people are already pulling their docks in.
I was thinking more of getting rid of the actual zebra mussels that were attached to docks and to other surfaces, so they wouldn't be there next year.
They die with it.
They die, but they don't fall off.
Well, that's,
Yeah.
And it just makes for additional zebra mussels to step on, and people get injured on those kind of things.
Yeah, I mean, normally if you pull the docks in and you set them out where they dry over the winter, they're not going to survive to the next
No, they don't
year.
survive, but they stay on.
What's that?
They don't survive, but they still are on the
No,
boat
they
lifts
would
and the
be
docks.
dead but still stuck on.
Correct, and then next year they just attach themselves to the dead ones.
Again, yeah. I mean,
So you
you
have
probably,
you have additional area that people can step on and hurt themselves in the future, is what I'm thinking.
you know, I'm,
Jay, do you have any comment on this?
Yes, members, while I was at the DNR, I did write several of the regulations related to this, and we allowed for people to, once the equipment is out of the water, and it's out of the water for a long time, or especially frozen over the whole winter, none of those things are going to survive when you put them back in the lake in the spring.
right.
Of course, it's illegal to transport it away from your property if you were moving a boat lift or something. That's a whole different story. But for the part of taking it out, putting it on your shoreline and putting it back in, there's no legal requirement to clean it off because they're going to be dead. And, you know, I guess I wouldn't see that the ones attached to an object are going to be a significant impact to shells in the water for recreation. I think, you know, we were trying to minimize what people would have to do, because it could be a very considerable effort to try and
Yes.
clean everything off if you're not moving it anywhere else.
Mike?
It seems like, at least in my case, that by spring, they just about fall off.
Yeah, they usually, well, it depends. Sometimes you have to power spray them or scrape them or something,
But
but
when they're dead like that,
generally-
they've been dead for a long time, can you dispose of them then anyway, in any form? I know that when you first take them out of the water and you take them off, that you can't transport them because they're an invasive
right.
type thing.
Technically, you can't transport them even if they're dead. We don't differentiate because then every conservation officer, or policeman, or whoever, or person would have to try to figure out if they're dead or alive, and that's not very practical
what do you do with
either.
them?
So you can well, it depends, I guess, how many you have, how you would try to dispose of them, but there can be permits to dispose of them on the DNR. I think on the DNR website, you can get them, so you can transport them to a
Right, yeah.
to a
This is all-
composting site or something.
Yeah.
Or you could do it on your own property, and then they're gonna disintegrate over time as well, just like if you're taking milfoil out of the water, same sort of thing.
So Jay, my understanding is that there's no prohibition to removing them from a person's dock, say in the spring after they've gone through the winter. There's no prohibition against removing them from the structure. They just have to stay on your property.
Right,
Right.
correct. Now,
Okay.
if it's a boat and you took your boat out, drove it on a public road to your house, they have to be cleaned off before you do that unless you get a different temporary permit that says that you, or not, actually, it's not a permit, it's a authorization that you will clean it off when you get it to your property, and then on the way back, you can't have any on, period.
Understood.
So we tried to make it workable for people to do things without having to go get a permit to transport it. They can just go online and say, I'm taking it out on Saturday, and I'm taking it to my property, and then you're covered.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that, just a note, that does agree with what we have. We have a brochure on our website that when we put that together a couple of years ago, we did have the DNR review it, and what you're saying is just what it says
Good,
about not being able to transport zebra mussels, dead or alive,
Right, right.
you know, without a certain permit, and we refer to all that. So I think that's, we keep that on our website. I think it's still valid.
Okay, thank you,
Thank
Jay.
you.
And so, Susie, to address your question, maybe what we do is we, and again, hopefully, after we get a permanent part-time administrative assistant, we can notify the Lake Homeowners Association to get some information in their publications, and then maybe next spring we could advertise that as well in the paper.
Yeah.
Anything else for Scott? Or Scott, did you have anything else? I'm sorry.
No,
Okay, any questions for Scott? Okay, moving on to 8F, the Treasurer's Report. Diane?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have the Treasurer's Report for October 2017. I'd like to make a motion to accept checks 4441 through 4446.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That passes.
Yep, thank you. So,
That's it?
yep, thank you.
Okay. Board council report, and I probably should have mentioned this earlier, I apologize. Alan had a meeting conflict tonight, so he let me know that he wasn't going to be here, so he's not, so he's accounted for. He didn't have anything that he asked me to bring up at the meeting on his behalf. So the consent agenda, Diane?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Announcements, none from me. Anybody have any announcements that they'd like to make?
I did bring up last meeting that on our third, the third Tuesday of the month, it's gonna be the Tuesday before Thanksgiving next week. I'm not gonna be here, but I didn't know if anybody else had a problem, and if we wanted to reschedule it.
Okay, and I'll be here. So how does the board feel about that?
I'll be here.
I'll be there.
We got a quorum, that's all. we
All right,
need.
that's perfect. Thanks for bringing that up, though, Jeff.
Yeah, good idea.
And then we're to an adjournment.
Make a motion, we adjourn?
Second. We have motion and a second to adjourn. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Thank you all.
Actually, I'm going to Los Angeles.
Okay.
Get to New Orleans as much as I can.